my biggest concern for Bitcoin, like if it doesn't get fixed, then a real schism happens or a real civil war happens. It's potentially not too far away from what happened in 2017, 2018 with the block size wars. There are millions of people out there that either recently bought Bitcoin or are thinking about coming into Bitcoin, and Bitcoin's at 103,000, and let's not get up now. So if you buy stock in Tesla or Amazon or whatever, there is an expectation that the management team, that the executives, the board all have a fiduciary responsibility to protect your investment. Bitcoin is not that way. Bitcoin is only as good as those people participating in the ecosystem.
Hi, welcome back. This is a Byte Federal podcast. Our guest today is Bob Burnett and my co-host, Michelle Weekly. We're here to talk about OpReturn and other issues that have arisen around this topic. Hopefully, we're going to be able to turn this conversation into something that I understand as a non-technical person. Michelle, as one of the technical people in our firm, does a really, really good job of breaking down some of these complex topics into things that if you're new to Bitcoin or you don't understand the way the network operates, hopefully out of this conversation, you're going to come away in a much better position to really understand these issues that are arising and to understand what your position might be on them. So without that, Bob, thank you for joining us back again for another round, and we appreciate that. How have you been?
I have been really good. Just got back from Austin, Texas. Spent 3 days in Austin, and the topic, of the day here for this podcast was what I was deeply involved with, over those 3 days, both formally in conference activities, as well as in back rooms and over dinner tables and over drinks and things like that. It was quite the event. For those newer, by the way, so there were 2 events actually, just so you know, so people know where I'm coming from. One event was called the Texas Energy and Mining Summit, and the second was called a BTC++. The first was kind of the name says, a mining and energy focused conference put on at Bitcoin Park. And the second, BTC++, is really a developer-oriented conference. And so the first conference obviously had more people kind of from what I would call the ecosystem, the miners and all that. But still, this topic was the number one conversation piece. And the second was the Bitcoin core maintainers, the Bitcoin core contributors, and then a lot of technical people from pools, wallet developers, a lot of the coders, that do a lot of the important work within the ecosystem.
Great. Michelle, I'm going to let you take it from here.
Great. So thanks for joining us, guys. Bob, obviously, it's always great to talk to you. I'm a little nervous to ask, but I am super curious if you are more or less concerned after the past week. But we'll get into that. So I think is, like Paul said, it's part of my job to really help translate between technical and non-technical people. And I think that that's a really important piece of this conversation is for us to zoom out and sort of give an overview of the different pieces that matter here. Because unlike some of the people that, we're seeing yelling online, like I actually think it's really important for everyone involved to understand what's going on. I don't think that you need a computer science degree. I think that, what we are fighting against is the fiat system. And the reason that fiat is so messed up is because nobody understands how it works, right? And so there is nothing more important than people being involved in Bitcoin, understanding how it all works. And so, Bob, I'm hoping we can do a little bit of an overview for people who are like, oh, I don't even know, there's Bitcoin Core and OpReturn and I don't know what's a client and there's knots and, I think a lot of people are in that situation. And even, over the past year or so, I've had conversations with people who were actually running nodes and not super familiar with kind of exactly what they were doing or why, but they were thinking that they were supporting the network and, things just sort of updated automatically. And, for example, I know that there are people that run nodes, so presumably relatively technical, but they don't necessarily understand even what is core and that that's a client and that there are different options. So, do you want to maybe give like the most high level overview possible about what is a node, what is Bitcoin Core, and how do these things sort of create all the whole structure that we know of as Bitcoin?
Yeah, sure. And I think you're right. I think it's important for us to start at this level, and also say that I hope, even like I said, those less technical people don't turn off, because even before we get into this issue, my biggest concern for Bitcoin is lack of participation or complacency. And so I think a lot of people that enter the ecosystem do so. They buy Bitcoin, or even if you bought the ETF or you bought whatever, and you kind of think, well, I'm just going to do that. And you think about it like a stock, like, hey, I bought this thing, and now somebody else is going to take care of it. Like, right. So if you buy stock in whatever, Tesla or Amazon or whatever, there is an expectation that the management team, that the executives, the board all have a fiduciary responsibility to protect your investment. Bitcoin is not that way. Bitcoin is only as good as those people participating in the ecosystem. And I'll say something kind of direct to everybody out there. And that's that if you bought Bitcoin and you're just sitting back expecting other people to do all the work, you're being selfish, and you're not doing what I believe you should be doing as an owner of Bitcoin, or sometimes I like to think of as a citizen of Bitcoin. Like, like if you're a citizen of the United States, there's an expectation that the proper that the future of the country is dependent on you voting, you doing jury duty, you willing to serve in the armed forces if called upon, um, running for office. Like, it's a participatory thing, and if everybody does nothing, then the whole thing crumbles. Bitcoin is the same
Right.
way.
A republic if you can keep it.
Yes, exactly. And I'd say Bitcoin is the same way. We still have an amazing future. There's a lot of turbulence. Um, uh, I think we have a bit of a schism right now. And it's more obviously inside the technical community and those closer to the technical community where that schism is occurring. But it's potentially not too far away from what happened in 2017, 2018 with the block size wars. Okay. So you asked the question though. So I think we have to talk about kind of how Bitcoin operates. So Bitcoin operates, I'd say, first and foremost through the nodes. One of the beautiful things about Bitcoin is anybody can run a node. So, and what is a node? A node is a client. It's a piece of software that is connected to all of the other nodes, and it's got several functions. One is it is a repository of the blockchain. So
And
looking
its
at
entire history.
it's the entire monetary history of Bitcoin sits within the node.
Can I ask a quick question here, Bob?
Please do.
Yeah.
So, understanding what a node is and thinking about what somebody observing this podcast might think, well, what's the difference between a node and having, why is it important that individuals can run a node versus just having the whole system run at AWS?
Amazon Web Services, which is the cloud
Yeah.
for those.
So it's important because we remove the trust factor that you as an individual have this amazing right to see everything that's occurring within the network and decide whether or not, we're going to get to this in a minute, you decide whether or not new things that are presented to you fit within what's called consensus, that they are acceptable and worthy of still being part of the network. So you get to decide that. Unlike your bank, with your bank, you place all of your faith in the bank. So you, whether if you have a checking account, for instance, it is their record of the events that matters. And in the end, it's completely dependent upon their permission to allow you to move your money around. So Bitcoin is completely differently in that when you run a node, when you manage your wallet through that node, then you have full discretion of the movement of your money. You actually decide what Bitcoin is. And we'll come back to this in a second. You decide what transactions that aren't yours are worthy of relaying to others within the network. So, which kind of goes back to that. So, what is a node? So you have this little island or dot within the Bitcoin ecosystem. There are tens of thousands of other people doing the same thing. You're connected directly to several of them, but through kind of a spider web of network, you ultimately connect to all of the nodes. On your node, you have a repository, the blockchain of the entire history. You also both receive messages, broadcasts from other nodes. So as new activity comes into the network, Paul is sending some Bitcoin to Michelle. That transaction would be broadcast from Paul's node to the rest of the network. You would send it to like eight nodes, who would then send it to 8 nodes, who would send it to 8 nodes, and then it would ripple through the network, something like that. And at that point, you would have signed the transaction. That's what kind of initiated this whole thing. But the transaction's not included in a block yet. So it's not, Michelle can see it. She knows that you've done that. But she shouldn't think at that point that she's actually got the money. So if she was buying, Paul, if you were buying Michelle's car, just because Michelle saw that broadcast, she shouldn't turn over the title and the keys yet. Like she's got some other things have to happen. And so what has happened is, let's say Bob, who's an independent party, I have a node. Some other node relays to me that they see that transaction. Now, on my node, in my client, I am able to configure my node to decide whether or not that transaction is worthy, my determination, of being included in what's called my mempool. Okay. So
can I ask a question real quick? Sorry, go ahead, Michelle.
Well, is your question about the client?
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, so the the client is the software that you're running, just for people like to go even a little further zoomed out, right? So you're using a client to kind of get this window into the network via your node.
Correct.
Yeah.
So my question was, why is your node connected to the mempool and not Michelle's?
Okay. So Michelle's is. Every node has its own mempool. So this is, I'm glad you asked that question, Paul, because I think there is a perception. Some people have heard the word mempool. There's a place called mempool.space. Okay. But every node has its own mempool. There is not a mempool. There are tens of thousands of mempools.
Right.
Okay. And they are not identical.
And this is sort of, for layman's terms, where all these transactions are queuing up to potentially be included in a block.
That's part of it.
Okay.
So in this case, let's pretend I'm a normal user on the network. Now, my node, which is running a client, and by the way, there can be different clients. We'll get to that in a second. But all clients, even though they could be different pieces of software, abide within the boundaries of something called consensus. Okay. So consensus basically says, what is valid within the network. Okay. Technically valid. As Bitcoin is defined today, that includes even transactions that have a JPEG embedded in them, as an example. Okay, so consensus says that. Okay. However, the client, as I mentioned, there are different clients. We'll probably come back to that. Is configurable, and so I don't have to, I'm going to see every transaction broadcast, but I have the right with my node of saying, well, there are certain transactions I don't like for whatever reason. I wish to not like them. And I don't wish to further broadcast them. Somebody else can, but I'm not. And I'm not actually going to let it into my mempool. It's not going to be there. Now, getting a really technical, it does actually still sit in something called the cache. So obviously I'm aware of it. I know that it has been sent to me, but I'm not letting it in.
You've set your settings to say, I don't want to recognize those types of datas.
Yeah. And
So
I
let-
don't, I view them for whatever reason, but obviously the reason of the day is spam, but it could be whatever. I could, I mean, I could kind of set it however I wanted.
The one thing that immediately hits me when I hear about this is that I could imagine a powerful entity that doesn't like some other powerful entity trying to censor their transactions. If, for example, Russia and China were trying to do an oil deal and the United States controlled a majority of the nodes, they could say, we're not accepting that transaction. Or would they just not even know it's a Chinese-Russian oil deal on Bitcoin because it's just a financial transaction and they don't have any other data that...
Well, and there's a number of potential ways that a transaction could be identified as, well, I would say it could be identified to a sender, and that an individual node or entity might say that's nefarious for whatever reason. Like that is possible.
But they would know. Would
However,
they know because of the address has been identified, the public address that's receiving it's been identified, or the IP address?
one possibility. Certainly one possibility. But the thing is, okay, and this is potentially important to our later conversation. if Bob Burnett with my node says, I don't like some aspect of the transaction between Paul and Michelle, I have no idea who Paul and Michelle are from the perspective of my node, but there may be some attribute of it. You've embedded a JPEG with your payment, and I don't like it. So I see it, but I'm not putting it in my mempool. And we'll talk about why that's important in a second. But I also am not going to relay it. Now, the truth of the matter is that even if 85 or 90% of the people are Bob's and don't relay it, it still propagates through the network to some degree. Obviously, it'll eventually reach most of the nodes in some form or fashion. And even if most of them choose not to accept it, there will be enough that do. Okay.
Do you think it's a fair parallel, Bob, to say it's kind of like sending an email to a bunch of people and you might see the email there, but you can choose not to open it in a vague
I think that's a
sense?
reasonable analogy for people. Yeah, and I choose not to forward it to anybody else, right?
Right. Right.
That's the decision. Now, you guys know me. I also happen to be a miner. Okay, so maybe we introduce this next piece here. So as a miner, my node is somewhat of a special node. I'm not saying I'm more important, but it's a special node because now when a new block needs to be created, as a miner, a real miner, by the way, we'll maybe define that as well in a second. But part of my role as a miner is to create what's called the block template. So let's pretend right at the same time, Paul, you're sending that transaction to Michelle, that a block was mined. So now it's time to mine a new one. Okay. Because you put that JPEG into that transaction, my node didn't put it into my mempool. Okay. When it's time to create a new block, me as a miner, I am only able to choose transactions from my mempool to include in the block. So regardless of what fee you attach to that transaction you were sending to Michelle, I am not going to choose it. It's not even from the perspective of the software that creates the block template. It doesn't exist. Okay. So now if there were others that propagated it and it ended up in the mempool of another miner that did accept it in its mempool, then it might have gotten in their block template. Now there's a race between Bob's hashing power and their hashing power to solve the block. If I win the block, that means they're going to have to try again. Okay. And so you are, because I filtered it out, that's the kind of term. It's not censorship. It's just me making a right, expressing my right as a miner about what transactions I want in my mempool and ultimately what transactions I want in my block. Then you're going to have to try again. You might have to do an RBF, which is replaced by fee. You might have to, again, I don't want to get too technical for you. You might need to offer a bigger tip, a bigger bribe, a higher fee, trying to get somebody to include it. But by the way, I wouldn't even know that you were doing it because I've already chosen to ignore it. But somebody else might be enticed if you offer enough. Or you could go to what's called an accelerator. like Marathon runs what's called an accelerator program, where you could say, oh shit, it's really stuck. And so you send them a note, oversimplifying, you send them a note, say, hey, Marathon, I really need this transaction to get through to Michelle. Here on the side, even I'll pay you an extra $200 to include it in the block. And they, even if they were not considering it before, they might put it in. Although as far as I know, they'll mine anything. So what's kind of happening, the way I view it, is what messages I choose to allow in my mempool and broadcast as a user is a right, an expression of speech, we could even call it. It's my freedom of speech in order to, to decide what I like and what I don't like. And I don't have to justify that for anybody, to anybody. As a miner, I believe I have the right to direct my energy and computing power that I am paying for, that I am taking a risk with, to work on whatever I feel is appropriate in my best interests. And that may or may not include the transaction from Paul to Michelle. So, and maybe I'll stop for a second, because then we maybe start getting into some of the specifics of the controversy.
One of the things that you hear in Bitcoin a lot is that Bitcoin's for your enemies. That's a saying that's pretty common.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot, so we would, as Bitcoiners, I think, like align with this idea of free choice. Run the client you want to run, choose the transactions you want to choose, and that therefore the greater diversity we might have in the amount of clients, the greater diversity in miners, this all leads to more decentralization. I've always been told that's a good thing. But from what I've learned from this argument is that like 95% or something of the people run Bitcoin Core only. May not even know that there are other options out there.
So it was 98%, I believe, of people were running Core, and we are at, I believe, 93%. So there's been a little bit of movement from Core to knots, as there's awareness about that as an option, and for, reasons
And
that we'll get
knots,
into.
and so knots, KNOTS, is that right?
Correct.
And Core, are there other clients?
There are a couple others. There's something called like Libra Relay, or Libra is another one. There have been others in the past. So a way to think about it is, you could have several different pieces of software that could create a PDF, let's say. Okay. And so there's a certain set of rules about what you have to do to create a PDF. And Adobe creates the most popular and common one. That's a closed standard, by the way, but for purposes of this argument, I think it would work. But there are other places and other pieces of software you can buy that will create an Adobe PDF. So once the PDF is created, nothing in the rest of the world that reads the PDF really knows or cares where it came from. It just sees a PDF. So that's what's, so a Bitcoin client, the most common one being Bitcoin Core. And by the way, there are multiple versions of Bitcoin Core. There's a current version, but there are, I don't even know, 20 some versions of legitimate older versions that are all still compatible with consensus. So it means that a node running Bitcoin Core version 28 27.0 and another node running Knott's version 27.0 don't know what version of software they're running. They are passing messages to each other that are all within the consensus rules, and then making local decisions within the node about, like what we talked about before. Hey, is this something I want in my mempool or not? Is this something I want to broadcast? And if that node also happens to be a miner, is it something I wish to use when I attempt to mine blocks? So
Can you explain to me where and how does the consensus rules fit in this stack? Meaning, is this sort of like the consensus rules is like the PDF standard? Is that equivalent where if you're going to
yes,
run this client, you
correct.
have to generate an output of this standard? Is that what the
Yeah, it
consensus
says
rules are?
that consensus says things like a block can be no bigger than, like, what's called 4 million weight units. The transaction has to have a certain structure. It has to use certain types of digital signatures. If you're a miner and you create a block, then the block has to look a certain way. There are certain things that have to be in the block header. So those sets of rules are, to a certain degree, those rules are Bitcoin. And so all of the nodes that abide by consensus, create the Bitcoin ecosystem. And most of the time, as I think Michelle gave the stats, historically, especially in recent years, almost everybody uses Bitcoin Core. Bitcoin Knots was created by Luke Dasher. Luke is a former maintainer of Bitcoin Core, still a contributor. And so what he did was I forgot what version he split off. He said, well, there are things that are not happening with Core, features and configurability that are not happening with Core that I want to offer people. So Bitcoin Core is an open source piece of software. So he took that software and then started modifying it to add lots of different features, especially configurability features, that gave people more tools, more choices about things like I talked about before. It made it easier to, for instance, configure your node to filter out the type of transaction that I talked about before.
Can I come back to consensus real quick?
Yeah.
If you create a client that does not conform to consensus, have you essentially created a hard fork?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
And I think maybe do you want to touch on the difference between somebody that is a maintainer versus a contributor? You mentioned that Luke had, been a maintainer. And I think that the structure of that is maybe valid to where we're going.
Yeah. Okay. So anybody that knows the right process and procedure, we'll get back to that in a minute, has the opportunity to make proposals about the future of Bitcoin, usually through what's called the BIP. And anybody can join. There's a GitHub, which is a repository for open source development. There's one for Bitcoin, and you can go there as a coder, and you can get all the code. You can go into lack of a better term, chat areas or send messages to other people within it and say, hey, I think we should do this, or I think we should do that. You can, but that said, there's a certain group of people, the maintainers, who are, for lack of a better term, those are the people with the golden keys. And
Merge access.
Excuse me?
Merge access.
They have merge. Yes, correct. So they have the ability to merge, which simple terms would be like they have the ability to make modifications and make official new releases of Bitcoin Core. Okay, so if I forgot what we're on, 2029 or whatever we're on right now, they would come out with version 30.0 or whatever, it would be through that group. But there's nothing preventing Michelle from going in, grabbing the client, adding her own features, and coming up with Bitcoin Weekly as an example, and offering that to the community. And as long as it stayed within the consensus rules, anybody could run Bitcoin Weekly and it would be fine. But the truth of the matter is most people, when they get a node, go to Bitcoin Core, they download Bitcoin Core, they have a certain faith in Bitcoin Core, understandably. And when Bitcoin Core comes, like any piece of software, it has a standard set of default settings. And I don't know that anybody has statistics on it, but I'm pretty confident the vast, vast majority of people take the default settings, the default configuration of Core, and that's what they run.
And they update it when an update comes because you're used to that.
Yeah. No, I don't, yeah. So, therein lies part of the problem. So even Core is not what I would call completely wide open. There are certain things like the OpReturn limit that restrict the default to something less than consensus. Okay, meaning that Core historically has had certain attributes that it reined in under consensus, and you might call that the standard. Okay, so the standard of Bitcoin was within that. And if most nodes abided by that standard, especially the mining nodes abided by that standard, then people trying to do things between, if we think about consensus as a football field, policy might be including the end zones, let's say, and the sidelines where the team stood. But standard is just the playing field. So there's a certain the standard is kind of in all directions slightly less than the consensus. So God, I hope that came out okay. I just made it up. But so what's kind of happening though is we're starting to see Core, the OpReturn issue, kind of more push toward the boundaries. Like instead of keeping things within the playing field, they're kind of pushing things to the edges.
They're getting booed and they don't care.
Yeah, well, this is going to be much deeper, Michelle. There, you're correct.
Sorry,
but just to and additionally, they're somewhat taking away the ability for the node itself to, even for the user by their own definition, to keep it within the playing field. So nothing is changing consensus. It's changing what's standard, and it's changing the configurability and the options that the users of Core have, whether they are nodes and we're talking about their relay policy or their miners and what will be included in the mempool. And maybe I'll stop there because maybe we.
Now, I want to go back to consensus as the hard fork again, because something I heard Shinobi say at Bitcoin Plus was that this OpReturn thing is a no big deal. We should just do it and deal with this topic at the consensus level, which seems to me like saying like, it's no big deal. Have another candy bar. We'll just deal with the heart attack later. Like consensus. If we're going to make changes at the consensus level, that seems to me to be like on the level of the block wars. And for him to flippantly say, what's the big deal? We can do this now. And we'll just, if we want to change it, we'll change it at consensus, is like disregarding how dramatic a change would be at the consensus level. Is that accurate, or am I completely off base?
I didn't hear him say it that way. So
okay. Maybe I misunderstood.
Wrong. I didn't hear him say it that way, because even though obviously I have opinions that are contrary to the way Core is, I haven't heard anybody, and I could be wrong, say we should be changing consensus yet. So they may want to change policy or standard. Those are terms we're talking about, but I haven't heard consensus change.
Could have sworn that's what I heard.
So I'm not saying you're wrong.
You're gonna go back and check the notes.
I don't want to. If he's talking about consensus change, then yeah. I mean, then we could see this thing move to civil war stage, because that's a massive change.
Yeah. Okay.
And
hopefully I'm wrong.
Because I don't think a consensus change at a minimum will require a soft fork and potentially a hard fork. What I have heard Shinobi say, and some of the other folks that are supportive and either directly, maintainers or contributors, is, hey, one, everything that's happened to date, all the filters, they haven't stopped any spam. Like, spam is still coming, and it's coming hard. So, and even to the degree we stop it with standards and policy, there's always these accelerators like the Marathon Accelerator, and they get in anyway. So essentially, let's give up. Let's just acquiesce to it. And by the way, and this is another part, but I disagree with that, number one. Number two, they also say the miners, it's good for the miners because they make more money. That
is a part of the argument.
These things being in the ecosystem right now drive fees higher, and it's good for miners. And by the way, the miners will always chase these. There's always going to be a miner that will chase these types of things. And so in the end of the day, let's just acquiesce. And OpReturn, I don't want to get too technical. So there's if you do want to embed data within Bitcoin, there are several different ways in which you can do it. And the way that's been happening to date, like inscriptions, has primarily been through the use of embedding it in the witness data. Okay, which I don't want to say. There are different when you make a transaction, when Paul sends something to Michelle, that transaction has many different components to it. Obviously, it has a send address and a receive address and an amount and all, the outputs and all that sort of stuff. Well, it and the witness data is part of that, and it's charged a different fee than the rest of the transaction. So it qualifies for what's called the witness discount. So people right now are paying essentially 1/4 of what they would pay if they embedded this in the OpReturn area. OpReturn area is in a different part of the transaction, and people have to pay the full fee when they do it. Okay. So they're trying to incur, they're almost basically saying, hey, if you're a spammer, we're now opening up the OpReturn area to you. And we'd like you to use that, but oh, by the way, it's 4 times more expensive. Which in my mind means they're not going to really use it. Now, I'm oversimplifying. There are some reasons why somebody might still want to use the OpReturn area and pay the premium. But the main point being, in my mind, this is acquiescing to it. It's like caving in to the spammers.
Is there a value to opening up the witness data space for some other use?
Well, I think sometimes, I mean, people write scripts and they have legitimate reasons why they write what are called scripts that.
But they're not being prevented from doing that today. So it's like the witness data.
Well, they aren't prevented from doing it within consensus, but my filters, I use me as an example, like the filters in the nodes that I run largely don't recognize those transactions, which means they're not broadcast as much and they're not in the blocks I create. If we didn't say it at the beginning, I run a mining company. So I'm typically not including them.
I'm just trying to, understand what the motivation is for even making this change, other than just this, which seems to be an excuse to me. They're like, oh, let's just acquiesce.
So normally,
that just doesn't add up. Like that just acquiesce doesn't add up because it's already being done. And this doesn't solve any problem. So you're producing work, you're creating contention in order to not change anything. This doesn't add up. So to me, it's like, okay, well, what's the real reason? Because I don't see the real reason.
It appears that Citria, which is a startup company, is developing some products and utilities, probably that don't have a tremendous amount of monetary benefit. And their life would be made easier in implementing their products by having the OpReturn field be significantly bigger than the 40 bytes of 42 of botnets or 82 of OpReturn. They want like 500 bytes on occasion or something like that. So for them, the OpReturn field, which can be up to, I think it's 100,000 bytes. By changing OpReturn, the standard of OpReturn from its current limits to unlimited, and then removing the configurability even for the user to move it back to a smaller level, means that anything that occurs in the OpReturn field of a Bitcoin Core node will end up in that mempool, will get relayed, and will be part of block templates created by mining nodes.
So that obviously starts to make sense to me. So then we have a player now that has an incentive to expand the OpReturn. What is it that they're trying to build? Citria.
I'm not even sure.
Okay.
Michelle, I don't know.
I don't know
Yeah, they aren't
the
even out
details of
yet.
it.
I mean,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think to me,
And do they have influence over core?
Clearly they do. That Jameson Lopp is, deeply embedded in Citria, but also very, very close to the maintainers and the core contributors. And that's his circle.
I think you pointed something important out, Paul, that it's not as if there's a problem or a bug that's being fixed, like, and this kind of goes maybe to the core of it. eh, Um, there's not necessarily something that's being fixed. So if you're responsible for maintaining like there's a difference between maintaining something, right? And changing it, asking for things to be changed that nobody's necessarily asked for.
Or that only one entity's asking for?
Well, yeah. So, but I just looked it up kind of, yeah, I forgot. It's been a long week. Their big thing is, ZK roll-ups. So zero knowledge proof roll-ups. And, I mean, it is possible, to be fair, that these things could help. So the ZK, so zero knowledge, proof roll-ups is a potential way of, for lay purposes, of kind of batching a bunch of transactions together, and presenting them to the network for validation as a group instead of individually. I think it did justice to that.
So to take the best case scenario, Citria is wanting this as a way to give the average person a way to do a small transaction on chain cheaper, and
No,
maybe
I
with
don't
some
think
more
it's
privacy.
it's not really the average person. It's more
No.
financial services, bigger.
Okay, so
bigger
for
companies.
like a big
And
exchange that wants a bunch of transactions and get them into a blockchain.
yeah, I think for today's purposes, I think that would be fair. But if you think about what I said before, they need to embed some data somewhere in these transaction fields. If they have to put it in the witness data, it there are some they can do it. There's some complications for it for them. Their
which is how
life's
it
made,
works now.
yeah, and so they're not. My understanding, and Jameson, said, "Hey, we're not dependent upon this, but it is made easier if we know that it's standard. It's essentially now part of the standard, and that they're not going to ever be in a position where they have to go to an accelerator or something like that to get it
So if
through."
let's just assume their intentions are fine, and there's this isn't an attack. If that's, what are the second or third order effects of opening up this
I don't know.
OpReturn data to a much larger set of data? What are there negative impacts that could come that maybe we haven't considered?
Well, we know for sure that it's easier for spam to get into transactions. It's a easier
Spam
transaction.
being non-financial data? Is that
Non-monetary
defining
use
spam?
cases.
Yeah,
Yeah, we
okay.
know that that's easier. Um, does it, like, for me, I do think we have to be careful about even worrying about this too much, because first of all, there is a choice, which is knots. So people that care about it, thank God, have the choice of knots. And interestingly, like Michelle gave this stat, I think it's actually approaching 8%. It went from like 3%. I think it's approaching 8% right now in the space of a week. In Bitcoin client terms, this is a phenomenal title. It may sound like a small percentage, but this is a phenomenal change in a short window for this type of thing, because it takes I mean, it is a conscious act, right? Somebody is going in and saying, you could think of it as, I'm uninstalling one piece of software and I'm installing something else over it. And as we said before, most people with their nodes just let it sit there. Like they're kind of a mindless thing. So I think, by the way, that's very, very encouraging.
I do too. And I also I feel like if I am a neutral party in charge of maintaining a piece of software, and there's a proposal that's been put out, and the reaction is so strong that a significant portion of people are going and using different software, that would indicate to me that this is not a good proposal and that we should look at this further and discuss it further.
Yeah.
And anybody with any neutrality, there's no other way to see it than that. If people are saying, this is not a good idea, I don't think this is what's best, I'm gonna, to the extent that I'm gonna uninstall this and go install this, you can't claim to be a neutral party and not examine that further, which to me is sort of so there's a technical conversation about the OpReturn and should that be changed or not, but then there's this larger conversation about how core is functioning, and I don't know,
Yeah.
how deep you want to get into that,
Well,
but
the thing for me, and I think I'm going to say what you said, but in a slightly different way, Michelle, is I have not seen a compelling reason for why now. And I've seen, at best, maybe Citria needs this. Well, Citria is a startup company. I've seen justifications that, these non-standard transactions, but within consensus, they're always going to get mined anyway, because Marathon's accelerator sits there as an example. Well, I mean, that's all kind of one-off small stuff. Like Bitcoin's a $2 trillion ecosystem now, $2 trillion of value, massive ecosystem. Lots of different people doing lots of different things. And Citria or Marathon, we don't even know if they're going to exist 2 years from now. I'm not wishing ill upon anybody, but we don't even know if these companies exist. We don't know if accelerators will still exist. We don't know what other products and services people are building right now that might be affected by this change in standardness, good or bad. This is to the question you said about second order and third order effects, Paul. We don't know. I haven't seen a single compelling reason for why now, why the rush. There have been many prominent people who have expressed concerns. Samson Mao, Jimmy Song, Parker Lewis. I mean, obviously, I'm with Ocean, and Barefoot, so I think I'm viewed as tainted. But so anyway, there's a lot of people, I think, that from all kinds of different areas, some with at least some degree of technical chops, that saying like, "Hey, what are you doing? Let's slow
right.
down." And if
No.
anything, I feel like it has, instead of softening, or I'm not quite sure how you phrased it, Michelle, but instead of being like a message to the maintainers to
Mhm.
slow down, it's seems to have been an accelerant. Like,
Correct.
you
They're
know, you
motivated.
can't tell me what to do.
Yeah,
Right.
that's
There's
what's
an
so
authority developing.
that's what's so weird about it for me. Not even from a technical perspective, but I can't come up with the reasoning as to why this needs to take place. And if I don't have that logic, then I don't see what the point is,
Yeah.
and why are you making this contentious?
Yeah. And it, it's hard not to wonder then, is there something nefarious? Is there something going on?
Mhm.
And it gets weird because like Peter Todd, who proposed what's called the PR or pull request for this to happen, then came out and said, well, he was paid by somebody else to make the pull request. That gets really weird.
They locked comments. You're not even
Yeah.
allowed to go disagree with this at this point. Like, so
What do
for
you
people who are maybe
expand upon
less,
that, Michelle?
yeah.
What-
So I think for people who are like not familiar with we touched earlier on how the code is hosted on GitHub. And so this is where the repository for the code is. And you have core contributors and core maintainers who have access to edit the code. And then you have and there's only nobody's ever been able to give me an exact number in terms of how many people have merge access. My understanding is that it's less than 10. There's a larger number of people that are core contributors. If you're a contributor and you're not a maintainer, you have to go through one of these people that has merge access. You may write the code, but it has to be submitted and adopted by somebody that has merge access. So we're really talking about a very small number of people. First and foremost is something I think people don't necessarily understand. And there's a standard process by which that's normally happening, right? So something gets, a bit gets posted and then people agree with it or disagree with it. And there's supposed to be a consensus that is formed about whether or not a change is adopted or not adopted.
Yeah.
And this is supposed to happen over a period of time, significant, lengthy discussions. And as Bob referenced, this has been like pushed through very quickly. And there's been a lot of obviously like disagreement. And instead of slowing the conversation down and saying, oh, okay, maybe we should discuss this further, it's kind of accelerated where they're like, now we're doing this.
Yeah. It comes off as an obstinate kind of child, would like react to something like, like if you're in the playground and somebody draws a line and say, don't cross that line, and the first thing they do is cross the line.
Yeah.
It's kind of this. But I think we actually hit what's interesting. It's been a learning experience for me the past 10 days or so, however long this has been going on. Because, and I think you're right. I think it's a learning experience, Michelle, probably for a lot of people here, like maybe even listening. Like, so how do these decisions get made? Who gets a vote? What, by what criteria do they make the final decision? Whose comments do they listen to?
Because
And-
currently the comments are locked, by the way.
Yeah, but even I'm even gonna go bigger than OpReturn, Michelle. I'm just gonna say in general, like,
Sure.
okay, what really happened? Because I said this a couple times. What's been interesting to me is to be fair and transparent with people. I've been involved in Bitcoin since 2017 in various aspects. I've touched a lot of places within the ecosystem, but not really this one that much. And I've discovered a lot of things I don't know just in the last week or so. Not some technical, by the way, in terms of I'm still learning too, but but more importantly about this it almost has this secret society kind of feel to it. And so I felt in this particular case, I had something worthy of offering based on my prior experiences to help Bitcoin reach the right decision. And what I found was that this society, kind of secret society, I don't know what else to call it right now, that kind of is in this cocoon. There's no guide to how you get into the club or the society. I'm to this day, I don't know how you get in. I don't know how you get them to recognize you unless you are a core contributor. So it's this kind of, and they seem to only value the opinions of other coders, and then to be a coder, which I used to be. I don't really, honestly, I don't do it anymore, but I did it for a long time. You have to be a coder of Bitcoin. Like you have to have been a core contributor. And so this is what Michelle was talking about. So I first was through kind of normal social media means trying to express some opinions and offer some guidance, and was told, this is the wrong spot. You're not, even though the people reading it were part of that club, was like, well, anything said here doesn't matter. You have to say it in GitHub. So, okay. So then I go over to GitHub and I say the same stuff. And then, as you said, then comments get locked. Nobody responds to me. So then there's also something called the developers mailing list.
Mm-hmm.
So I find out how to get part of that.
Right.
And I put together an email there, and I became part of all the other people. Like I get to see everything that everybody says, not just about OpReturn, but about all the different stuff. So that's good. Like I learn now, I can see what's going on. But again, I put together an email, and crickets. And it wasn't just crickets. It was like, hey, some people were talking about OpReturn and standardness, and I jump in an email chain, and then got completely ignored. Not one person responded to anything I put in there. And then other people piled on as though I had never said anything, and just, started commenting about the one before. So like everybody else got comments, and nobody even said, hey, Bob, you're full of shit. Like it was just completely disregarded. And so that kind of leads me to, like, I have three big concerns right now. First one is, what is the process? Who decides on the process? How will this governance work going forward? Who gets to be in the club? Why is it that especially at this stage of Bitcoin's development, why is it that people who may have a lot of experience or a lot of investment and dependency on Bitcoin Core aren't perceived as stakeholders at a minimum, and part of, they don't have to necessarily be part of the decision process, but at least have a voice. One of the things I learned, people who don't know me, I was the chief technical officer at Gateway. And I had a staff of at one point about 5,000 people in my organization. I learned a lot about managing and consensus and, those sorts of things. And, what I learned was the beauty of a traditional organizational structure is that when you have a boss, you have a ultimate authority. It's a very effective form of decision making, right? So done well, it's very effective. But you still, if you're in that position, you still need to know who your stakeholders are. You still need everybody to remain motivated, and especially when you're going to make a controversial decision, that that you need to solicit in an open fashion inputs from as many different perspectives as possible, and make sure that those people all feel they've legitimately had a chance to express their position. And then when you make a decision, especially knowing that there is going to be disagreement, maybe it's like 60-40 kind of decision, and you decide to side with the 60%, or maybe even the opposite. You decide to side with the 40%, let's say. As the executive in charge, you side with the 40%. You need to go back to the 60% people and say, hey, I made this decision. I really listened. I understand that you're upset by this decision. Here's why I made the decision I made. Now let's all work together, and the next time I promise you I will consider your opinion again. Like you still feel part of the point I'm trying to make is you still feel part of the team. And if you feel, what I've learned certainly was that if you feel that your voice was legitimately heard and maybe you didn't get your way, you can still feel part of the team. But if you feel you just got railroaded and completely discarded, you feel like shit, you feel disrespected, unmotivated, and sometimes vengeful, and that's what's happening right now. We have a process that facilitates that that now I do understand that there are a lot of opinions, and that you'll hear a lot of the people within that group say, well, we need to focus on coding.
I have I'm sorry to interrupt,
Go ahead.
but
No, go ahead.
so this is the attitude, right? Is like we need to focus on the code, and the code is what matters. And so there's the mailing list where there's supposed to be other conversations. But the problem that I have is, you have said several times you're a stakeholder, which you absolutely are. You're not a coder, so maybe GitHub's not like the right place. But there are people that are coders, that are contributors, who are trying to participate in that conversation and who are being blocked out. And we know some of them, some of them have been in my DMs, some of them are running their mouths on X,
Yep.
some of them are being quiet.
Yeah.
But there are legitimate coders who are being pushed out of the conversation. And to me, that's a huge red flag, and it's a very serious problem.
I do agree with you, but I will also push back and say I think that we're at a point in the ecosystem where it's not all about coders, that this isn't a typical FOSS project, FOSS being
Right.
free and open source software. Because like me as a miner,
Yeah.
I operate my business. I need a client
Right.
to do the right thing for me. And what I had to sit and listen to over the last couple days that sometimes pissed me off was I had to listen to software developers who don't run mining companies talk about them building the software based on their understanding of miner economics and miner incentives. Like
Right.
I am not a coder at their level. And I respect these are some intelligent people with some skills. I truly do. However, to my knowledge, none of them have ever run a business, much less a mining company,
Right.
or really thought through the game theory. And, I don't want to get into this right now, but I've put a lot of thought and effort into the future of block space, how to build block space marketplaces, all this sort of stuff. And they're starting to fuck around with something that affects that marketplace. And then at the same time, I'm not saying I'm an expert on everything, but if there's something I know a lot about, it's that. And then I'm being told, no, you're excluded.
Right.
So, and I don't know who else they're ignoring that may have
Anybody
something.
that disagrees with them at this point.
Yeah. And some of them may have, I have personally a lot invested. I have a lot of investor money. I have a lot of, my, at this stage of my life, I think you guys know, like, what happens to Bitcoin is at a professional level the most important thing to me. And so when I see these sort of behaviors, it really, really concerns me. The one thing I will say, though, is, as we said, Bitcoin is just consensus. We do not have to use core. And if Knots becomes the predominant client, we could get ourselves in a very interesting situation, though, where, because, by the way, there are things that, like, Bitcoin's not perfect. Like, we need some continual improvement in the code. There are some things that really have to get fixed. And I'm really afraid of how we're gonna get some of this stuff done if we continue to use this process. The other thing I want to say is, like, I have this I mentioned, I have this perspective. I think they do not understand miner economics properly. Think they have this thing all figured out, and I'm quite confident they don't. But the second thing I'll say, having done 40 some years of product development, is that as time goes by, if you're building a product that's evolving, giving people less flexibility and less configurability is not the direction people want to go. People, as you, your, whether it's your car or your phone or your laptop or, whatever, all these sort of things, you get more robust, more configurable, more flexible. And they're going the opposite direction. Like, guys, that this is the wrong way to go. And, again, something I have an expertise in that I'm trying to at least be heard about is I can talk about my experiences and offer something there. So, so at the end of the day, I think what happens with OpReturn and spam and all that is not an existential point for me. I don't like it. I think it's a bad idea. Won't kill Bitcoin. What could theoretically be existential, or at least cause a schism in a fork that I don't think any of us want, especially at a point when we have so much momentum, right? Like, we are part of, I'm gonna, include us and them. Like, we're part of a really small group of people that are operating at Bitcoin at a certain level. There are millions of people out there that either recently bought Bitcoin or are thinking about coming into Bitcoin, and Bitcoin's at 103,000. And, like, let's not fuck it up now. Like, this is really bad timing.
Yeah.
So the fuck it up part is, from what I'm hearing, how this translates into like a schism in the operation of the protocol, like management without a manager, right? I mean, we're talking about all these everybody's free to come and go, but if we've got this clique,
But not really.
this group that says, well, we're in charge now and we're not going to listen to anybody else.
Yeah.
That flies counter cultural to what Bitcoin's supposed to be.
Yeah. Yeah. And I may not have expressed it
And if you
well.
can pay somebody to do a pull request for you, that's really
Yeah, that's disturbing.
screwy.
Yep, that is. It is very disturbing. I think also, when I say we, I'm going to conclude myself. I think, we're not evolving these sort of things, because I would express it as, we're supposed to be rules, not rulers, or rules without rulers, right? And so it's hard to figure out to give the maintainers and the people that can do the merge, like it's hard. Like, how do you come to consensus? Like, I actually should use a different word. Like, how do you reach agreement about how to make a decision about a change? It's hard. And who do you listen to? That's hard. But Bitcoin has reached a point where it's a lot more than a software project. And so, I think they have to think of, I use the term stakeholders they have to think about who their stakeholders are. And their stakeholders are a lot more than other coders and their small circle of people that they interface with. People that may be doing, core Lightning development, wallet development, ZK rollups, but those people represent just a segment of the ecosystem. And there needs to be some mechanism for other people to participate and have a voice. And like, one of the things I said to somebody I was having a side conversation was, I said, the funny thing about Bitcoin is there's when you join Bitcoin, it's unlike any other project or experience, because if you're at a company of any size, when you join, there's employee orientation, there's an employee handbook, there are people to guide you through and tell you, oh, this is how the company operates, this is how decisions get made, this is how promotions happen, this is how new products get developed. Like, all this sort of stuff gets explained to you. When you decide to participate in Bitcoin, you get nothing. Like, and so even a guy like me that sits closer than the vast majority of people to the technical community is sitting here 8 years in, just learning now how this thing operates, and still being locked out, still not having any sort of grasp of how to get in. And it's at some point that's going to cause that schism. Like, if it doesn't get fixed, then a real schism happens, or a real civil war happens.
So, Bob, after listening to what you just said, it makes me feel like the focus on the technical discussion is a diversion to what the real issue is. Because the very first time I heard about this OpReturn stuff and I kind of grokked it slightly, I was like, this doesn't seem like a big deal. And then Michelle started explaining to me some of the more nuanced things that were happening. And then I started to see this as a Bitcoin culture issue.
Yes.
And sort of now getting your take on it, it does seem like something that is being hidden behind technical language, but is much deeper.
Yeah, I believe that that's accurate. And that's why I said, like, I may differ. I mentioned earlier, I don't know whether it was on like or not, but there are guys like Mechanic and Luke that have been very vocal, and I think they've put a lot of focus on the spam, and I get it, but probably where we differ a little bit is that I see it more from the cultural standpoint. But remember, Luke actually is in the circle. Now,
Mm-hmm.
so he gets a voice. He gets to talk to these people. Now, he still gets ignored. But they have to listen to him. Like he just knows too much. He has too much credibility from their perspective. So they kind of have to at least.
So if Knots becomes 50% of the client software being used, does this sort of solve the problem? Do we have enough competition within the client arena that this doesn't become a problem, or how would that work?
Well, I think that's where it gets really funky. Samson Mao put out a tweet in the last 24 hours basically saying, he I haven't talked to him, but I mean, he's clearly voicing objections along similar lines to me. And he said, hey, maybe we need to start up a competitor to Bitcoin Core and fund it differently, Bitcoin Core 2 or whatever the hell we want to call it, right? Now, we could roll Knots into that, because but that will be fine until the point at which we hit real issues, like how are we going to address quantum resistance? How are we going to fix? There's a time issue with the Unix clock. There's some things like that literally have to get fixed. Like, and to my knowledge, right now will ultimately require a hard fork. Okay, so there's a point in Bitcoin's future where a hard fork will be required. And that's even in a kumbaya world, like everybody getting along, like a hard fork, meaning that nodes will have to upgrade, like and that old nodes will, like consensus must change. In other words, like there's a point at which it will have to happen. So we better figure it out by then. And do we have 3, 5, 10 years for that to happen? I don't know, but or I don't know if Core is going to come out of the blue right now, because they still have 90-some% and say, well, we are going to take a directional change and try to force something else that creates a consensus change. And that's the real scary thing, right? Because, like, for instance, I met, I had some really good conversations outside of all this with some technical people. And like one of the issues, like there's a proposal kind of being bantered about. It's called Hourglass. And the issue is, what do we do with what we believe to be Satoshi's coins at the point that if we leave Satoshi's coins where they are, eventually a quantum computer will be able to take them. And they can take all of them at one time. And that obviously could be very bad, right? So what do we do? I don't have an answer yet, but this is a great question. Like, do we burn them all right now? Just send them into oblivion forever? push them all to the Genesis block, right? Or push them all to the some unspendable point. Like there's that's one way to handle it. Another way to handle it is to say, well, we're going to almost, I'm going to oversimplify, like send them back to the Coinbase and reissue them like super slowly over 100 years or something like that. Like let them leak back out through the mining process as new subsidy.
How do you do that if you don't have this private keys? I don't understand.
Well, you
like
have
technically
to
how you do that.
Well, a quantum. See, the issue is that a quantum computer can essentially break it, right?
So you're saying you would some group would break, some white hackers would use quantum computing to break it and do something good with the coins before somebody does it bad. Is that what we're saying here?
I mean, I don't have it all worked out, and I'm not the best guy to say this, but I am talking to some of them, and I think that the game theory about this, and it's nice that some of the people that are talking about it, like one of the guys' name's Hunter Beast, he's known as Hunter Beast, and he's got something called BIP 360. He's a nice guy. He's interfacing to me, but he's not a maintainer, or he'd be more of a core contributor. Like he's talking to me saying, hey, you know about mining, you know about some of this game theory. I'm including you. It's including me in the conversation. Great, thank you. I appreciate that, and I'm going to legitimately put thought into how I think it should happen, because but one way to make something like that happen, Paul, would be we essentially let the coins be moved to a different address. We would mine essentially what you would consider by consensus an illegal transaction, but everybody agrees that we're going to steal them. We're basically going to steal them from Satoshi and put them somewhere, and then we either burn them and just reduce the 21 million, or do we leak them out over some period of time, again through the mining process? I don't know, but these are real issues that have to be dealt with. That's the point I'm trying to make, is like, and
I mean, I would imagine that every sovereign crypto hacking group in the world is trying to get those coins already.
Well, that's why we have to resolve it well before somebody sneaks up on us with, and I think we're still far enough away, like, but we do have to deal with it, because what'll happen is if we don't fix the problem before somebody with the right capability has it, they can just steal them all. Right? So it's not.
Yeah, I mean, assuming that happens, because I'm of the general belief that a lot of shit doesn't get fixed until it breaks. So it would be harder for us to fix the problem before it happens. Assuming
if that happens, if we wait for somebody to steal them, then we have to back the chain up, hard fork.
Or that hacker just got incredibly rich.
Yeah, and I mean, we could all agree never to mine.
We know where those coins. We start tracking those coins.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'm just.
And what if it's the United States that does it?
Could be, but it's a race. I mean, it could be.
What if it's I mean, because there's how many wallets does Satoshi have?
I'm not even sure, but there is some consolidation of them, and so I think there's a couple wallets that have a lot.
If they get hacked, then we all have no KYC coins.
Say it again.
If they get hacked and they get spent, then we all have coins polluting all of our wallets. Meaning, you know what I mean? That's
like
the bulk
one
of the coins will be non-KYC hacked coins.
Yeah.
that are tainted in the eyes of the regulators.
Yeah. And by the way, I don't even know where I sit on that. It may just be
that's what I'm
like, you
saying.
know
This
what?
is like something I hadn't even considered. Is it's like,
Yeah. So I'm still
this is
thinking
the
it through
next 5-hour
myself,
conversation.
but it's a fantastic thing to think about. And maybe the right thing to do is not change consensus and say, hey, you know, it's a honey pot. First person there wins, and, you know, off they go. But and it would have, you know, assuming they want to start spending them, maybe they would. We don't know, right? We don't know. Will they want to spend them? Would they want to just have?
make a Bitcoin reserve.
Yeah, I mean, who knows, right? I don't know. So
launch a project on the NASDAQ that does financial engineering.
could be. So, but you know, like the main point being that, I mean, to have some group, it would be best. I want to be clear too. Like the best thing, I've expressed probably a lot of things that are negative or disturbing. The best thing for Bitcoin is for Bitcoin Core to exist and have a second competing client, though. And so if we end up with 80% core and 20% knots, that's very healthy, in my opinion, for Bitcoin. For a lot of reasons.
And you're saying that this is the knots is like a core. They're not a part of core. They're a separate group that are funded separately and competing to a certain degree.
They're competing.
Yeah.
And that way not. And by the way, what if there's, just to give you an example, like what if there is for some stupid reason of, you know, core, a version of core comes out and it's like a complete mess for some reason. And all of us have seen software be released that for some reason is a complete mess, right? Mm-hmm. For some reason that happens and all those nodes are really messed up. Well, at least we got 20% of the nodes operating properly is enough for us to recover. And
I think that like that to me is like the big discovery here is that how, I don't know if centralized is the perfect word, but there's no diversity in the amount of clients that you could run.
Yeah.
And that like,
yes.
And it's happening. So we are decentralizing the client piece right now. But even having that said, so I think that's healthy. But on the other hand, I also want to say, like, I have some frustration. I'm directed some animosity toward Core. I think they have a very difficult job. I don't think they've been given the proper tools and maybe the proper training to figure out how to create an atmosphere of cohesion and inclusion going forward. And it would be best just for them to make some changes in their process and in their behavior set and in their communication so that going forward, we have a lot less of this animosity and frustration. And I would love to see, given that, them continue to get proper funding so we do have great minds working there. I mean, maybe they don't need a CEO. Maybe they need somebody focused on interaction with and soliciting feedback and communicating back to people from the ecosystem, and kind of maybe that's something that they could change, is just have a person or two that are really good at that.
And it's also an opportunity for knots to create an alternative model that
we need that too.
Focuses on that and
but I
sets that
still,
example.
I, you know, if they can't, then I support what Samson said, which is Let's
Mhm.
go do something else.
Yeah.
But I just want to be clear too, because I'm I don't have to be involved. I don't know that I even want to be involved. I'm a busy guy, but I, this is a real area of concern for me, and I hope it gets addressed and it gets addressed quickly because we have serious issues, like we just talked about with the quantum issue, that have to get addressed at some point. And uh, I also want to say, I'm still very optimistic about Bitcoin. That you know, just because we're talking about these issues doesn't mean that Bitcoin's doomed or people should be afraid. But I gave a talk in Austin, and one of the things I said is my hope from this is that this is the Great Awakening, that the people within the community that have been sitting on their hands or coasting along or kind of just along for the ride realize that their participation is important. They have to have a voice. If they're pissed about something or concerned about something, they got to say something. And they have to pay enough attention to have an opinion, that we can't just assume everybody has the best intentions, or even if they do, that they're always going to make the right decisions. Um, so I hope this is the Great Awakening, because we haven't had huge disagreements in this area since the block size wars, meaning that almost the entire population of the Bitcoin community has never experienced something
Yeah.
like this.
Yeah,
And it's
and that's
probably
gotta be
healthy
super, super scary for a lot of people. I remember the block size wars, and it was scary for me. I had no idea what was going on.
Yeah.
But you have certainly helped us come to a much better understanding of where we are today. So you've been awakening us. So I appreciate your time and all the education you provided. It's been huge.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we succeeded in staying less technical, but I think we did the best that we could. And I agree with you very much that it is um, an important obligation that if you want to be a Bitcoiner and involved in Bitcoin, then you need to educate yourself and be involved, because the reason that fiat gets away with all of the nonsense that they do is because the ignorance of the people, because people don't understand how fiat works, the structures, the rehypothecation, the banks, all of these things. And we will absolutely not allow that to happen in Bitcoin. And the way that we prevent that is by doing education and participants understanding how it all works so we can keep it in check.
Awesome. Bob, thank you very much for your time today. Why don't you tell everybody where they can find more from you and hear all your great thoughts on the matter.
I'm active on Twitter, boomer underscore BTC. I occasionally rant on a show called Old Man Yells that you can find on YouTube and Spotify and places like that. So those are best
Awesome.
places to find me. Thank you.
Awesome. All right, guys. Thanks again for joining us. Remember to like and subscribe to Byte Federal's podcast, where you're always going to learn more. And hopefully we'll take you along this journey and make it a smoother ride for you. Thank you very much.
So you've heard Bitcoin is the new gold rush by now. As world leaders on all sides have endorsed it as the future of money, and now you're looking to get started, we'll show you how. It's actually easier than you think. First, go to your nearest Byte Federal ATM and turn your cash to coin. Byte Federal has over 1,200 locations around the country with the highest daily limits. Go to our website, bytefederal.com, to find the nearest ATM to you. Log in to any wallet, then create an account, deposit your US cash, and instantly convert it to Bitcoin. That's it. We are the only US manufacturer and operator in the Bitcoin ATM industry, and our US-based live customer service is second to none. Go on, give it a whirl, and don't get left behind. Click the link below.